Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, the program that's a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to God's glory and that of his kingdom. Of course, overarching all other challenges to us at the moment, foreign and domestic for that matter, is communist China. It has of late become much more obvious that the Chinese are no longer content in pursuing so called unrestricted warfare against this country to weaken it, to, um, well, ultimately destroy it if they can, and supplant it as the dominant power in the world. They are now ever more intent, and it's unmistakable, on having military capabilities available to affect those kinds of outcomes as well. A man who has devoted most of his professional life to monitoring closely, analyzing carefully, and raising appropriate warnings about these developments in China is our first guest. His name is Richard Fisher. He is with the International Assessment and Strategy Center. He is a serious author and essayist on matters involving China, and I think nobody follows more assiduously and effectively the sorts of developments that the Chinese may not want us to know about, but that are nonetheless part of this growing capability to wage war against us in the old fashioned way, the kinetic kind. Rick Fisher, it is so good to have you with us again. It's been a while, and there's an awful lot of developments taking place in your part of the battle space. So we're delighted to be able to catch up with you a little bit.
Thank you for
Welcome
having me
back.
back, Frank.
I wanted to start by noting that we did a really, I think, important webinar last week with our Committee on the Present Danger of China. We're very pleased that you are one of its members about the quality, shall we say, or lack thereof, of deterrence to the sorts of threats that you have been monitoring from China, Rick. I think the consensus of the experts that we assembled was that we are not doing what we need to do in this regard. And I wanted to speak to you specifically about the naval buildup of China in the Western Pacific. Captain Jim Fennell, one of our colleagues, observed that there's something on the order, at least in places in the region, a 10-to-1 advantage enjoyed by the Chinese seagoing forces these days. That's staggering, and it gives rise to a real concern that they may feel emboldened to use those forces against Taiwan, perhaps against our own forces and assets and personnel as well. Give us your overview, Rick, of the naval might of the Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy at the moment.
Well, Frank, Jim Fennell is one of our heroes and one of our very top experts, having spent his career watching the Chinese Navy and the People's Liberation Army up close and personal. Uh, to
Mm,
add to Jim's analysis, I would only point out that it's not just the PLA Navy that is growing, that just launched its third and first major flat top today, uh, uh, is producing submarines, but it's also the People's Liberation Army Navy operating in conjunction with a growing PLA Air Force, PLA Naval Air Force, and PLA Missile Force. All of them
mhm,
combine to pose unprecedented threats to American forces in the bases of our allies in Japan, Australia, perhaps, and South Korea. It's if we should ever go to war against China, uh, th- of course they will do so because they have concluded that they can win, and they will
mhm,
fight the war with everything they have. They will attack our forces in Okinawa with combined naval, air, and missile strikes. If they push us out of the way, they will commence simply a massive invasion of Taiwan. They will utilize thousands of civilian, very large ferries to medium sized barges, all roll on, roll off. And they'll be able to put millions of soldiers and occupation forces on that island within a month, provided
Wow.
they squash the Taiwanese resistance, which they will also attack with massive combined arms firepower. Uh,
Hmm.
it's a very thin line that is holding them back. The PLA has not fought such a very large war since 1950. They are working very hard to put into place all of the capabilities from under the ocean to on the sea, in the air, unmanned systems, and spacebound systems that they believe they need to dominate and defeat the United States. How close are we to that point?
Rick,
I'd say
yeah.
barely just a few years.
Hmm. Boy, I hope it's that long. Rick, I want to come back to space in a moment after a short break, but before we go there, I'm interested in your thoughts about this carrier force that the Chinese are building. You've indicated that we expect to see many more of these uh, sort of traditional flat top decked carriers. Um, they are, as you've pointed out, very set on utilizing anti carrier missiles, what they call carrier killer missiles, against our uh, naval assets, specifically our carrier battle groups. Is there an inconsistency here, as you see it, between their evident confidence that they can neutralize our carriers and the very considerable investment they're making in building up their own?
Absolutely not, Frank. They believe that they can take our carriers out first, so theirs will survive. Their carriers are being created for power projection, for imposing Chinese Communist Party hegemony on the world. They're not being built for defensive purposes. There's nobody on earth is crazy enough to attack and invade China. They are building up forces. They are investing in ports, in potential bases all around the world. In a decade, they could have a force of seven, maybe eight carriers, and they will use that force in combination, in coordination with their economic and political leverage in countries around the world to gain bases, to surround the United States, to deter America from advancing our interests in defending the freedom of our allies and our own freedom.
Yeah. I'm so glad you've emphasized this point about what I guess is oftentimes now being described as the Belt and Road Initiative, this kind of infrastructure build out of a colonial empire. And I'm particularly struck, Rick Fisher, that in on the coast of Peru at the moment, there are very large naval facilities being built that would seemingly support those carrier battle groups at some point. Again, to our great detriment, to be sure. Rick, we're going to pause for just a moment. We're going to come back and we'll visit with you about space and the degree to which the Chinese are investing there for the purposes of dominating what happens here on Earth as well. That and much more with Rick Fisher of the International Assessment and Strategy Center right after this.